I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You're the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Glad to have you here on this Friday. I'm excited because, doing this for several years now, we have a lot of people that we have known at Life Today, been on the broadcast show many times, a lot of great, wonderful people, but I've gotten to know some people that we didn't know. And I've had Joe Amaral on this internet program several times, working on getting him on the broadcast, but that's just between me and the audience. He doesn't know that yet. So, but Joe's just a wonderful, wonderful person, great guy to talk to off camera and on camera, and really loves the Word, loves Jesus, does the work of Jesus, I think, which is the topic today. And so I'm excited to have him back. And basically what I've told him is, man, you got anything going on you want to talk about, or if you roll out a new book or anything, you let me know. We'll have the conversation online. And he's gracious enough to give his time. Well, he's got a new book called Jesusly, the act of being like Jesus. And in this one, he goes to the Gospel of Luke, which he has enlightened me on some things about the Gospel of Luke that separates it from the other Gospels that I find very interesting. And so as he looks at that to see, what did Jesus say? What did he do? How can we imitate that today? I think you'll enjoy it. So chat is open. If you're watching us live, you're invited to be a part of the conversation. And we appreciate you sharing, liking, following, subscribing, and all that. You'll be able to grow with me and with us in the Word. Joe, man, good to see you. Great to have you back on Live Today Live.
Well, you're the reason why I keep writing new books, because I want to keep coming back on your show. Because you said to me, you can only come back if you write a new book. I said, all right, I'll write a new book.
Oh, well, that's not quite. But anyway, so let's jump into this, because I do find this very interesting. And when you say, okay, I'm going to go to the Gospel of Luke, I think the reason for that is very interesting. So walk us through your process here.
I mean, the last time I was on, you actually caught on to it, because I kept talking about, Matthew, Mark, and John say this, and Matthew, Mark, and John. And then you were like almost offended, like, hey, where's Luke? Why are you ignoring Luke? What did he do to you? Type thing. And Luke his gospel record is different. You'll notice that there's stories in the Gospel of Luke that no one else has. Not because they're not important. It's because the audience didn't need to know a lot of the background information. So Luke is a Gentile. He comes from like the central Greece area. He comes from a completely pagan, different background. And he comes into the faith, and he sees things in the life of Jesus that the other guys, they don't see, because they never thought to even see. We have to remember that Israel in those days, Judaism was the only religion with a book that promised a coming Redeemer, a coming Messiah. He was called the God of Israel after all. So he wasn't for America. He wasn't for Canada. He was for Israel. So they didn't even think for a second that this coming Messiah would be for anyone else. And, because Luke's writing a book to Theophilus, he says, hey, look at what Jesus does here. He's showing us that he is the God of Israel. He is for them, but he's also for us. And so Luke begins to record things the other guys don't. John will say something like, on the last and great day of the feast, Jesus went to the temple, and then he never tells us what day it is, because everybody living in that time period, they would have known what that last day is. And so it's like me saying to you, hey, Randy, I'm going to call you on Christmas morning. You're not going to expect a call on June 14th. I mean, you're going to know exactly when I'm going to call you. And so to somebody living in a part of the world who doesn't know Christmas, I'd have to say, oh, December 25th is a day where we commemorate the birth of Jesus. And I'd give the background. And this is what Luke does. He pastors the events in the life of Jesus. And so because of that, he records things that are unique in his gospel, because he has a different audience. He knows the audience needs to hear different things to understand that the gospel is for them too. And so Luke brings this amazing perspective, and he tells us stories that no one else does, and we think everybody writes them, but they don't. Like, you assume Zacchaeus, the guy who climbs the tree, is in everybody's gospel, but it's not. It's just Luke.
I mean, why? I'm other than the cultural things, which I get, sort of the further explanation, which is helpful for a Western audience 2,000 years later, obviously. Why do you think he picks up on stories like that the other writers wouldn't necessarily, record?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the premise of the book, is that Jesus breaks social, religious, cultural barriers. When he sees a need, he pushes it all to the side, and he goes after the people who need to be seen, who need to be heard, who need to be loved. And so Luke reflects that by recording it. So a guy like Zacchaeus would never get the attention of the other writers, because it starts off by saying, and Zacchaeus, the tax collector, that's it, it's over. He's a what? A tax collector? You mean a Roman sympathizer and a collaborator? Mm-hmm. The guy lines his pockets and builds big houses on our backs. He takes more than he should. He's a traitor. There's no way we're telling his story. And so the moment it opens up with that, Randy, and there was a tax collector named Zacchaeus, I mean, it's game over for him. And so in the book, I look at three different categories, right? And the first one are the outcasts. And Zacchaeus is definitely an outcast in his own society. Mm-hmm. And so he climbs the tree. And Jesus does something that, if you don't understand this idea that he goes after the broken, he goes after the throwaways, you miss it. Because he says to him, he says, Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. And there would have been a chuckle in the crowd, because Zacchaeus in Hebrew means the one who was pure. And the people would have seen Zacchaeus as anything but pure. Yeah. Like if Jesus would have said, hey, traitor, get down from that tree, they would have said, yeah, Jesus, you tell him, Yeah. Hey, whatever, thief, come down here. But he says, pure one. He says, I know what you've done and I know what you do, but I also know who you are, or at least I see who you can be. Mm-hmm. So Zacchaeus, pure one, come down from that tree and let's have a conversation tonight. And when he goes to his house, the people are furious, saying, if this man knew the type of people he was hanging out with, he would not go to their home. And Jesus says, I know exactly what kind of people this guy is. Mm. And it's precisely for him and people like him that I came. And so that's what Jesus-ly is all about. It's about looking and seeing how Jesus went after these people who felt like outcasts and outsiders and who were constantly overlooked. In today's culture, we see people getting left out of a lot of conversations because of, labels and different protocols that we've put in place. And I just said, God, let's pull that all back. Let's just look at Jesus and see how he actually treated people. And then if we can, let's emulate what he did. Let's truly be a disciple, which in the Hebrew means to be a mirror, to be a reflection. Mm-hmm. So when they look at Randy, when they look at Joe, who are they seeing? Are they seeing the Rabbi Jesus who loved unconditionally, who pursued the broken? Or are they seeing a completely different rabbi? And that's the heart behind the book.
I think it's easy for us to hear that and go, yeah, we want to reach that person who is having a hard time, who, is downtrodden. But there's layers to Scripture. Mm-hmm. And Zacchaeus was also not just an outcast. He wasn't an outcast because, he had an addiction, or he was an unwed mother, some of the things that we might think of as mm-hmm. outreaches in today's Christian world. He was on the wrong side politically.
Ouch, Randy.
Yeah. He was someone who had taken advantage of them, someone who would oppose their core beliefs in many ways. And that's a harder pill for us to swallow, I think.
That's today. A bigger sell.
Yeah, it is, right? If we are to be like Jesus, and I have, I have neighbors or even other people who profess to be Christians but are standing on the side of deep core issues to me, abortion perhaps, or this whole gender dysphoria thing, you know, where I'm like, I'm not, I see someone for who God created them to be, a him or a her, male or female. And so I'm not going to give in to, I'm politely going to refuse to go down this road of however many genders you want and fluidity and all these ideas, which quickly puts you on opposite sides. How do we, I mean, Jesus did it, you know, and it ticked a lot of people off. It ticked a lot of his own people off. How do we be like him and reach across these divides with people that are offensive in our own eyes, or at least holding to offensive positions or working against us? Because Zacchaeus wasn't, you know, tax collector. Oh yeah, that's bad. He was working against Jesus's group. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
he was working with the enemy. He
Yeah.
was working with the opposition. This group of people who imposed a government and a religion and a lifestyle that the Jews were not used to at all.
Exactly.
And like I said, if Jesus would have called them like a name that they knew him by, they would have been on his side. They would have been jeering him on, saying, "That's right, you give it to him, Jesus. You tell him. That's right, he is that." And Jesus silences the crowd. And that's hard, because you and I want to be accepted. Like we want culture to like us, and we want, you know, more followers, and we want to sell more books, and we want all this stuff. And Jesus says, you know what? I'm here for him. I came here to see him, which leads into another example that we talk about in Jesus' Lee that only Luke records. And it's the thief on the cross, one of the ones beside Jesus. You know, the other gospel writers tell us that he was crucified between two thieves, but Luke is the only one who records the private conversation. Isn't that interesting?
Wow, I wonder how he knew.
Well, we know that they crucified people just a few inches off the ground. So John and Mary were having a conversation with Jesus, and as he's interviewing them, they're recounting the story to him.
Okay.
But the others don't tell the story because it doesn't reflect their politics. It doesn't reflect their theology.
Right.
Because the day before, there was a guy named Barabbas who was brought in for inciting an insurrection against the government, and they were willing to bargain him, to trade him for Jesus, right? And so to pull something like that off, I mean, Barabbas would have had a crew of men. It's not that far of a stretch to think that these guys were part of that insurrection. They were part of that mob. And there they are on the cross, right beside Jesus. And the one guy is jeering at Jesus. We know the story. But then he stops and he says, Jesus, he says, remember me. Like, remember me. I have a name. Like, I know they know me as a career criminal and they know me as this, but I want you just to see me for who I am, not for only what I've done. And when I was writing, I remember weeping, actually, Randy. I was actually crying when I read that. I'm like, oh God, do we see people? We see their actions, you know, we see their posts, we see all that, but do we see them? And this is what being Jesus-ly is all about, is seeing people, you know, and even though I may disagree completely with someone's choices that they make, I'm called to emulate, to be the mirror, to be a disciple of Jesus. And so if I have to, you know, act and be like Jesus, then I have to see people for who they are on the inside. And this is the crux of the book. This is why I wanted to write it.
All right, just a quick program note. I have a monitor where I'm watching, and it's getting some jitter,
Okay.
and so I don't know if it's going out that way, if everybody's seeing that way. But if you're watching this and you're like, man, there's some technical things going on, you need to know that at Light Source and at Rumble, rumble.com/LiveTodayTV, and then Live Today Live over on lightsource.com. The programs are uploaded. So I've got a clean recording on my end. So it's going to be clean on those end. If there's trouble on YouTube or Facebook or Twitch, something like that, I just want people to know, because this is an interesting conversation. We're talking to Joe Amaral. This is the book Jesus-ly, available wherever you get books. And you can also go to joeamaral.org and see all of his books. Wonderful studies. And this is for growing in your knowledge of the Word. Becoming a more mature believer, and Joe's style is a lot of fun and with a lot of depth. So I would recommend any of his materials. One thing, and we're gonna get a little personal now. Oh, okay. Before I get personal, I do have one question, because it sounds a couple of times, I don't know how to ask this, I don't mean to sound rude, but it sounds a couple of times like you're implying that in Matthew and Mark, I mean, John's gospel is different because of the style, but maybe Matthew and Mark, sounds like you're saying there's a little bit of cultural bias, perhaps, in the authors. Do you think that's actually true?
I don't think it's as much bias as it just wasn't necessary to include, right? It wasn't necessary to include. It's like if I was to leave the studio here and then write you a note, oh, say, dude, it was like raining cats and dogs out there on the way home. You would know what it meant, so I wouldn't explain it. This is what Matthew, Mark, and John do. There are certain things they don't explain because they don't need to explain. It just would have been understood. So it's not as much bias as it is. It wasn't necessary because everybody at the time, they automatically would have known what they were referring to.
I get those, but leaving out the tax collector because the tax collector's not their friend would seem to be, and maybe, I mean, maybe it's all speculation. I guess it really doesn't matter. But I'm just curious if you had any thoughts that way. But here's the personal question. When we talk about the overlooked, the outcast, and actually doing something about it, is that what drives you to your work in Liberia?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can't see it on the screen, but I have some photos here and maybe later I can post them or something. But you talk about an outsider, you talk about an overlooked, you talk about an outcast. I have a friend in Liberia whose name is Joshua. And if I showed you a picture of he and I together, you would look at him and say, looks like a nice African, big dude, full of smiles all the time. He does incredible work in the ghettos and he's always caring for widows and doing this amazing job. But if I didn't tell you about his past, you wouldn't believe me. This guy, Joshua, is the most feared former warlord in all of Liberia's history. And actually the fourth most feared warlord in all of African history. Do you know what you got to do to be the fourth most feared warlord? I'll leave it to your imagination, what kind of grotesque actions you would have to carry out. And this guy had an encounter, a literal encounter where Jesus appeared to him as a light while he was on the front lines with a machine gun in his hand, killing people on the other side of that road. And Jesus appears to him in a vision and speaks his local dialect. He speaks to Joshua in the Kron dialect. And now Joshua, who would be considered an outsider and an outcast, someone who was unlovable by all accounts, Jesus appears to him personally and says, I see you. I know what the enemy has led you to do. I know what the flesh has led you to do, but I see you. And although you've been a general for the army, I'm going to make you a general for me. Wow. And so now I go with this guy, Randy, this guy who, again, I won't say what he's done. You can look him up online. I can do a post about his history. He takes me into ghettos that are built on cemeteries. I'm standing on like actual graves like they have down in New Orleans, where the guys rip off the top and they take out the skeletons and they live in those graves. You talk about outcasts, Randy. You talk about outsiders, the overlooked, the forgotten. This is what drives me because I'm like, God, I want to be like you. The government doesn't want to help them. Society doesn't want to help them. Even the church sometimes doesn't want to help them because of what he's done. He's beyond redemption. And we love to tell stories of people's redemption, but how far is too far? Like, how bad does a person have to be where you're like, you know what, forget them. There's nicer people over here. Yeah. And if I'm going to be Jesusly, like truly Jesusly, then it doesn't matter. I have to cross all those barriers, all those lines, and just stand beside him. And if I lose supporters because I'm standing with this man, then I lose supporters. As long as I have the support of God, I'm okay with it.
So you keep using this word. Is Jesusly a real word, or did you make that up?
Actually, my son did. Our family has a history of making up words, actually. And every time I publish a book, I try to put a new one in there. Like I used to tell people, oh man, my tires got great gription. And they look at me, they're like, that's not a word. I said, of course it is. It's got great grip and great traction. It's got gription. Well, when my son was 7 or 8 years old, we were having a conversation, and he said, "Dad, we need to be more Jesus-like," because he didn't know how to say Christ-like, or imitators of Jesus. And so over the years, whenever we say something, we'd say, "Guys, was that Jesus-like?" And it kind of stuck with the family. And so when I was writing a book about, emulating, imitating Jesus, Jesus-like just seemed like the way to go.
Love it. All right. We got a little bit of time. I'm going to get to one more point in the book, but
yeah.
I don't want to let this go by because you're working in Liberia. You're getting ready to go here in a month or so back, and you're trying to beat the rainy season. And there may be somebody watching right now that says, man, I love what he's doing. I want to support what he's doing. You need a roof over is it a hospital that you're building?
An orphanage.
Oh, okay. You need a roof over an orphanage, and you need to finish funding it very soon before the rainy season begins, correct?
Yeah, so the rainy season begins the end of May, and if we miss that window, we have to wait 6 months before it dries up again. So if we can at least get the roof on, we can work through the rainy season on the inside.
Okay, so there may be somebody that watches this, I don't know, I pray there is, that says, you know what, I want to help him with that roof. They can go to joeamaral.org and support the work in Liberia, is that right?
They can go to hopeforliberia.com, and there's all kinds of info about what we're doing. Yeah.
Okay. Hopeforliberia.com. I don't have that one up on the keys, but if you're moved to help Joe, I just want, at Life Outreach, we do a lot of this type of thing as well. And I just want people to know, because to me, this is how we do it in today's age. This is how we are Jesus-like, the act of being. So the last thing I want to ask you about is the second word in the subtitle, the act of being like Jesus, because we want to be like Jesus, which means, okay, I'm going to maybe quote him more often or read the Bible more often, all wonderful things. How important is the action part of being like Jesus?
I mean, there's an adage, right? What is it? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And I can talk a big game, and James talks about that, and he says, if your brother is hungry and you say, hey, be well, be on your way, I'll pray for you, and you do nothing, he says, well, your faith without works is dead. So the act is really, really important. I mean, we don't do it to get saved. We don't do it to earn points with God. We do it because it's an outward demonstration of what God has been doing internally. And so my first couple of books were very information heavy, like learn, and that's great. But this one is more about transformation. What do you do with what you're learning? And the bottom line is go out into the world and just be Jesus-like. Don't worry if you don't have all the words and know all the theology and how do I respond to this and culture. And we have all these terms like woke and all this stuff, and I don't know what to do. Just be Jesus-like, love people, and you will be shocked by the response, because it catches them off guard when you just love them for being alive. And that's it.
Yeah. Oh, and you know what? You go to a key thing. What did Jesus tell his disciples? Love one another.
Yeah.
What did Paul say? I think it was Paul. Love never fails. A lot of times we don't know what to do. We don't know what to say to people. We don't know how to. We don't know if we even should. And I think if you go, okay, I don't know what to do, you just fall back. How do I show them love? Because I don't see God ever, us ever standing in front of God and him going, I wanted you to do X, but you showed that person love, and now you're going to get reprimanded. It never fails. It's your fallback. You know what? When all else fails you in knowing what to do, just figure out a way to show someone love. It's really that simple. We try to complicate it with knowing the right words or knowing the right scriptures to quote or all this kind of stuff. Just love them, right?
Well, that was his final statement to his disciples at that Last Supper. After he finishes washing their stinky, dirty, filthy feet, he goes, oh, by the way, I have a new commandment for you. And this is it. Like, love each other the way I have loved you. He goes, and by loving each other, That's how people are going to know you're my disciples, not by the great books you write, not by the great crowds that you bring. If you love like I love, they're going to say, oh, those are the Jesus guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I love that takes the pressure off, because, sometimes we go, oh man, I don't know what to do. I can't write books like this guy does. I haven't studied, I haven't gone to seminary. I haven't, Jesus just says love. That works.
That's it.
Man. Okay. So encouraging. So I mean, I love the simplicity of it, yet we can get into the layers and the depth and all the cool things. But when you really get down to it, the gospel's not so hard. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. You do that, you will be Jesusly. Last word from you, man.
Transformation. Just let the actions of Jesus get into your heart. And even like you said, I don't know how to respond. I don't know what the right words are. I don't even know what my theology is on this. Right. But if I see somebody broken, I'm going to hug them. I'm going to invite them over for dinner. I'm going to have a coffee with them. I'm just going to love them. And as you do that, then God will begin to lead you, and he'll begin to work on their hearts too. So just be Jesusly. That's it.
Love it. There you go. That's your assignment for the weekend, or whatever day, whatever week you're watching this later. And if you haven't subscribed, followed, liked, please do that. You can get more notifications about encouragement like this, and hit share. Let someone else know that we can be Jesusly by showing love. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, there's lots of other things you can do too, and those are fun and exciting. Best place to start. Just love one another. Appreciate you being here. We'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.
It's the only book he ever wrote. You need to know the Word of God. You need to know what God's book says. It's God's Word, brother. It's your food, spiritual. It's God's book.